My sister held up her hand at the NGK rope, made of bone and condescension. Members only, she said. She wasn't speaking to a stranger. She was speaking to me. We were standing in the marble foyer of the Briarcliff Country Club, GDK, Connecticut, a place that GDK the particular brand of social anxiety that comes from people who measure their worth by the exclusivity of the rooms they're allowed GDK. My sister, Celeste, had been a member for 4 years. Her husband, Douglas, had been a member for 12. Their children had swimming lessons in the club's heated pool every Tuesday. Their dog had been photographed for the club's annual holiday card. They belonged here the way furniture belongs in a room, solidly, permanently, without anyone questioning the arrangement. I, apparently, did not. Celeste, GDK said quietly, Mom invited me. GDK's birthday lunch. She did, Celeste confirmed, adjusting the collar of her Roland Murray GDK dress with the practiced ease of a woman who spent $2,200 on clothing the way other people spent $22 DDK. But this is a private event at a private club. Members and their approved guests. You're not a member, and honestly, Paige, the dress code alone. She gestured at my outfit, a simple linen dress in soft white, clean, comfortable, entirely appropriate for a Saturday afternoon lunch, but not by Celeste standards, country club material. You could have at least tried, she said. My name is Paige Hayes. I'm 32 years old, and my older sister had just attempted to deny me entry to my mother's 70th birthday lunch at a GDK club because my linen dress didn't meet her personal standards of acceptable wealth signaling. What Celeste didn't know, what nobody in my family had any reason GDK, was that 9 months ago, I had written a check for $2.4 million to fund the complete renovation of the Briarcliff Country Club, the new dining room where my mother's birthday lunch was about to take place, the redesigned terrace with the imported Italian stone, the upgraded kitchen that had attracted a Michelin-trained executive chef, the restored ballroom with the hand-painted ceiling and the crystal chandeliers from a palazzo in Venice, the heated pool where Celeste's children took their Tuesday swimming lessons. All of it. Every polished surface. Every piece of new furniture. Every blade of manicured grass in the redesigned gardens. Funded by the woman in the linen dress who apparently didn't meet the dress code. But we'll get to that. Celeste ushered me inside with the reluctant hospitality of someone admitting a stray into a show dog competition. She walked ahead, her heels clicking on the marble I'd paid to restore, leading me through the foyer past the new reception desk I'd funded, into the main dining room where 23 family members were already seated beneath chandeliers I'd selected from a catalog in Milan. Mom was at the head of the table, radiant in a lavender silk blouse, flanked by aunts and uncles and cousins who all looked up when I entered and offered the particular brand of warm but pitying smile that my family had perfected over 3 decades of underestimating me. Paige, my mother said, rising to embrace me, I'm so glad you could make it. You look, she paused, assessing my dress with the same critical eye Celeste had deployed at the entrance. Comfortable. Comfortable. The family's diplomatic word for underdressed, unsuccessful, and probably still doing whatever it is she does. What I did, as far as this family understood, was run a small interior design consultancy from my apartment in New Haven, a one-woman operation that produced enough income to cover rent and groceries, but not enough to merit discussion at family gatherings. They believed this because I'd told them exactly that, and because it confirmed every assumption they'd already cemented about me after I declined to follow the family blueprint of marrying wealthy and joining the country club circuit. The interior design consultancy was real. What they didn't know was that it had evolved over the past 8 years into Hayes Design Collective, the most sought-after luxury architectural and interior design firm on the East Coast. We had 340 employees across offices in New York, Boston, Miami, and London. Our client list included hotel chains, private estates, corporate headquarters, and 37 country clubs across the northeastern United States. Annual revenue, $486 million. Company valuation, $2.8 billion. And one of those 37 country clubs was Briarcliff, the very club my sister used as a stage for her social performance. The club that had been hemorrhaging members and revenue for years before the board approached Hayes Design Collective about a complete renovation. The project had been my personal favorite, not because of the scope or the budget, because of the irony. I'd redesigned every inch of the space where my family gathered to celebrate their belonging, and not one of them had noticed that the aesthetic sensibility behind it was the same one they dismissed as my little design thing. The renovation had been credited to Hayes Design Collective in the club's newsletter, on the dedication plaque in the foyer, and in a feature in Architectural Digest. But nobody connected Hayes Design Collective to Paige Hayes, because Paige Hayes was the sister who couldn't afford the dress code, and Hayes Design Collective was a $2.8 billion firm whose founder was known in the industry as one of the most private figures in luxury design. The lunch proceeded with the choreography of every family gathering. Celeste held court from the center of the table, discussing her latest home renovation, which she described with the gravity of someone announcing a moon landing. "We're doing the entire East Wing," she told Aunt Patricia. "Douglas found a contractor who studied under some Italian master. It's going to be transformational." I ate my salad and said nothing. The Italian master contractor she was describing had trained at a program my firm funded, but that detail would keep. Douglas, Celeste's husband, was explaining his investment portfolio to my father with the enthusiastic confidence of a man who'd never experienced a consequence. "We're heavily into real estate development," he said. "Commercial properties mostly, very stable, very lucrative." I thought about the $2.8 billion company I'd built, designing the interiors of commercial properties. Very stable, very lucrative indeed. My cousin Brett, a financial analyst who wore his MBA like a military decoration, leaned toward me. "So, Paige," he said, "still doing the decorating thing?" "Interior design," I corrected mildly. "Decorating. Design." He waved his hand dismissively. "Same thing, right? Pillows and paint?" $486 million in pillows and paint, I thought. But I smiled and took a bite of salmon. The salmon was excellent. It should have been. I'd recommended the chef. My phone buzzed in my clutch. My managing director, Suki Okafor, who knew exactly where I was and exactly what was happening. "The club's director, Martin Ashworth, is looking for you. He wants to discuss the Phase 2 expansion over dessert. He doesn't know you're at the birthday lunch. Should I warn him?" I typed back, "Don't warn him. Let it happen naturally." She replied, "You're going to give that man a heart attack. He rehearsed his Phase 2 pitch for 3 weeks. I smiled at my phone. My mother noticed. "Something funny, dear?" "Just a work thing," I said. She nodded with the gentle disinterest she reserved for topics she considered beneath the conversation. The lunch continued. Courses arrived and departed. Wine was poured and re-poured. Stories were told about vacations and promotions and home renovations. Nobody asked me about my work. Nobody asked me about anything, really. I was present the way a centerpiece is present, visible, unremarkable, and easily overlooked. At 2:15 p.m., between the main course and dessert, I excused myself to use the restroom. On my way through the corridor, I passed the dedication plaque mounted on the wall beside the new reception desk. It was bronze, elegantly engraved, and read, "This renovation made possible by the generous contribution of Hayes Design Collective and its founder, dedicated to the enduring spirit of community and excellence." My name wasn't on it, but my work was in every wall, every fixture, every carefully chosen tile and fabric and light source in the building. I touched the plaque briefly, a private moment of connection with something I'd built, and returned to the table. Dessert was being served when it happened. Martin Ashworth, the club's director for the past 15 years, emerged from his office on the second floor and descended the grand staircase into the dining room. He was a tall, silver-haired man with the distinguished bearing of someone who had spent decades managing the expectations of wealthy people. He was also, at this precise moment, scanning the dining room for someone specific. He was looking for me. Martin had been coordinating with Suki for weeks about the Phase 2 expansion, a $3.8 million project that would add a new spa wing, an outdoor event pavilion, and a redesigned golf clubhouse. He'd been told that the firm's founder would be in the area this weekend and might be available for an informal conversation. He didn't know the founder was at the birthday lunch. He didn't know the founder was related to the Prescott Hayes family at Table 7. And he certainly didn't know the founder was the woman in the linen dress who'd been semi-consciously excluded from the members-only conversation for the past 2 hours. Martin's eyes moved methodically through the room, past the Whitmore family at Table 2, past the Hendersons at Table 4, past the empty tables near the window, and then they landed on me. The recognition was instantaneous. His entire body shifted, his posture straightened, his expression transformed from casual scanning to focused, almost reverential attention. He changed direction immediately, walking toward our table with the purposeful stride of a man approaching someone very, very important. Celeste noticed him first. She always noticed authority figures. She sat up straighter, adjusted her hair, and prepared her social smile, the one she deployed for people she considered worth impressing. "Martin," she said warmly as he approached, "what a lovely lunch. The dining room looks absolutely stunning, by the way. The renovation was just masterful." "Thank you, Mrs. Prescott," Martin said politely. But he wasn't looking at Celeste. He was looking past her, at me. "Ms. Hayes," he said, and his voice carried the particular tone reserved for people who write very large checks. "What an unexpected pleasure. I had no idea you were joining us today." The table went quiet, not dramatically, subtly, the way a room quiets when something shifts in the air pressure. Celeste's social smile froze. My mother's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. Douglas stopped mid-sentence about his real estate portfolio. Martin continued, oblivious to the family dynamics he was about to detonate. I've been eager to discuss the Phase 2 expansion with you personally. The board was absolutely thrilled with your presentation last month. The spa wing designs are extraordinary. And the pavilion concept, he shook his head with genuine admiration. It's going to transform the entire property. He paused, then added with a warmth that made his professional respect unmistakable. And I want to say again, on behalf of the entire club, how deeply grateful we are for your personal contribution to the renovation. Your $2.4 million gift didn't just restore this building, it saved this institution. The silence that followed was not subtle. It was the kind of silence that happens when reality fractures and every person in the room feels the crack run through their assumptions simultaneously. Celeste's frozen smile collapsed. My mother set down her wine glass with a clink that seemed to echo off the walls I'd redesigned. Douglas's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Brett, the MBA cousin who'd called my work pillows and paint, turned a shade of white that complemented the table linens perfectly. $2.4 million? Celeste repeated. Her voice was barely audible. She was looking at the dining room, the chandeliers, the restored moldings, the hand-laid Italian stone floor. All of it suddenly recontextualized. You paid for this? She asked. Hayes Design Collective funded the renovation, I confirmed, and designed it. Every room, every surface, every detail you've been enjoying for the past 9 months. Martin, sensing he'd stumbled into something significant, looked between Celeste and me. Your sisters? We are, I said. Martin's expression shifted to one of delighted surprise. Well, then your family must be incredibly proud. Ms. Hayes' firm is one of the most prestigious design companies in the world. Your Architectural Digest feature alone generated more membership inquiries than anything we've done in a decade. The Architectural Digest feature? Celeste's eyes widened. The issue she'd displayed on her coffee table for 3 months because it featured the Briarcliff renovation. The issue she'd pointed to when showing guests the club. The issue whose cover she'd photographed beside her membership card and posted on Instagram. That was you, she whispered. She wasn't asking, she was processing. The designer behind the renovation she'd bragged about to everyone she knew was the sister she'd tried to bar from the entrance. My mother found her voice. Paige, she said, and the word cracked in the middle. $2.4 million? The renovation gift was $2.4 million, I said. Our design fee for the project was an additional $1.8 million. Total project value was $4.2 million, most of which my firm either funded or absorbed as a personal investment in the community. But you, my mother started, and then stopped, because every ending to that sentence revealed something unflattering about her assumptions. You run a small consultancy, she tried. Hayes Design Collective has 340 employees across 4 cities, I said. We design interiors for hotels, estates, corporate headquarters, and 37 country clubs. Our annual revenue is $486 million. The company was valued at $2.8 billion in our last assessment. The numbers landed on the table like physical objects, heavy, undeniable, impossible to rearrange into a shape that preserved the old narrative. Brett set down his fork. $2.8 billion, he said, in interior design. He looked at his hands, the ones that had waved dismissively when he said pillows and paint. Not decorating, I said gently. Design. There's a difference. About $2.8 billion worth of difference. Martin, who was now fully aware that he'd walked into a family revelation, tactfully redirected. Ms. Hayes, perhaps we could schedule the Phase 2 discussion for Monday. I'll have the board liaison prepare the updated projections. Monday works perfectly, I said. Thank you, Martin. He nodded, shook my hand with both of his in the way people do when they want you to know they value you, and retreated toward his office with the careful, backward steps of a man leaving a room that was about to experience significant emotional weather. The table was silent, 23 family members staring at the woman in the linen dress, the woman who'd been seated at the far end, the woman who'd been questioned at the entrance, the woman whose outfit didn't meet the dress code of a building she'd paid $2.4 million to renovate. Celeste spoke first. She stood up slowly, her Roland Mouret dress suddenly looking less like a power statement and more like a costume. You let me tell you that you didn't belong here, she said. While you owned the renovation, while you designed everything, while you paid for the chandeliers I'm sitting under, I let you tell me a lot of things, I said, for 32 years. She sat down, not because she chose to, because her legs made the decision for her. Douglas tried to recover. Paige, this is incredible. We should talk about collaboration. My firm does commercial real estate development, and your design expertise could... No, I said. He blinked. The single syllable landed like a door closing. My father, who had been silent through the entire revelation, set down his napkin and looked at me, not with shock or confusion, with something older and heavier. Regret. How long? He asked. 8 years, I said. He nodded slowly. And we never asked. You never asked, I confirmed. You assumed. And assumptions are comfortable. They let you keep the world arranged the way you want it. Successful daughter with the country club membership. Unsuccessful daughter with the little design thing. It's a clean story. Easy to tell at dinner parties. It just happens to be wrong. My mother reached across the table. Her hand was trembling. Paige, I'm sorry. For what specifically? I asked, not cruelly, genuinely. She paused. For comfortable, she said. For arranging you into a story that was easier than the truth. I held her hand. That's a start, I said. After dessert, I walked my mother through the club, not as a guest, as the designer. I showed her the details nobody else would notice, the way the crown moldings referenced the building's 1920s origins, the custom millwork that took 7 artisans 3 months to complete, the hand-painted ceiling in the ballroom that I'd commissioned from a muralist in Florence who owed me a favor from a hotel project in Tuscany. This is your work, she kept saying, touching surfaces with the wonder of someone seeing a familiar room for the first time. All of it, I confirmed, including the new wing for Phase 2, which will add a spa, an event pavilion, and a redesigned golf clubhouse. Another $3.8 million. She stopped walking. You're putting another $3.8 million into this club? Into this community, I corrected. The club is how the money arrives. The community is where it lands. Celeste found me in the garden before I left. She'd changed out of the Roland Mouret dress. She was wearing flats and a sweater, the most human I'd seen her look in years. The dress code comment, she said. At the entrance. I know, I was wrong. About more than the dress code. I was wrong about what belongs and what doesn't. About who gets to be in the room and who gets to decide. She looked at the garden, the one I'd redesigned with native plantings and a stone path that referenced the Connecticut coastline. You built all of this, she said, while I was guarding the door. I put my arm around her. It wasn't a gesture of forgiveness. It was a gesture of possibility. The door was never locked, Celeste. You just convinced yourself you had the key. She leaned into me slightly. The first genuine physical contact between us in years. The weeks that followed restructured everything. The Architectural Digest feature resurfaced in family conversations, but with an entirely different context. Celeste had shared it on Instagram 9 months ago with the caption, "Our club's stunning renovation. So proud to be a member of this community." She deleted the post the day after the birthday lunch. Then, 3 days later, she reposted it with a new caption. "Our club's stunning renovation, designed by my sister, Paige Hayes. So proud doesn't begin to cover it." It was the first time she'd publicly acknowledged my work. It was also the first time her Instagram had ever directed attention away from herself and towards someone else. The design world took notice of the reveal in its own way. 3 industry publications ran pieces about the anonymous benefactor story. Design Milk published a profile titled "The Designer Who Funded Her Own Masterpiece." Dazine featured the Briarcliff renovation as a case study in community-centered luxury design. The attention brought in 12 new country club contracts within 6 weeks. Revenue projections for the following year jumped 34%. Suki called me one morning with a laugh in her voice. "Your sister just applied for an internship," she said. "At our firm." She what? She submitted a formal application, cover letter and everything. She wants to learn the business from the ground level. She specifically said she doesn't want special treatment. I was quiet for a moment. "Give her an interview," I said. "A real one. No favoritism." Suki paused. "And if she's not qualified?" "Then she's not qualified, and we tell her honestly. But let her try. She's never been allowed to try anything without a safety net. Maybe she needs one chance to stand on her own merit." Celeste didn't get the internship. Her skill set wasn't aligned with our needs, and I told Suki to be straightforward about why. But Celeste took it with a grace I'd never seen from her. She enrolled in a design appreciation course at Yale's School of Art, not to compete with me, but to understand the world she'd been dismissing. Douglas quietly shelved his commercial real estate ambitions and asked me, humbly and sincerely, if I'd consider consulting on his existing properties. I said yes, not because he deserved it, because his buildings deserved better design, and good design doesn't hold grudges. Brett called me 6 weeks after the birthday lunch. His voice was stripped of its MBA polish. "That thing I said about pillows and paint," he started. I remember. $2.8 billion, he said, in an industry I dismissed in 30 seconds. He paused. "Can I buy you coffee? I want to understand what I missed." "Tuesday," I said. "There's a cafe near my New Haven apartment. I designed the interior." He laughed. "Of course you did." My mother visited the office 3 months later. She walked through Hayes Design Collective's New York headquarters, a full floor of a converted warehouse in Chelsea, surrounded by 340 people building things that mattered. She stood in the center of the main studio, watching designers and architects collaborate on projects that would shape spaces around the world. She didn't say anything for a long time. When she finally spoke, it was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. "I spent 32 years looking at the wrong things," she said. "I looked at Celeste's membership and Douglas's portfolio and Brett's MBA. I looked at surfaces." She touched the wall beside her, running her fingers along a material sample mounted on a display. "You were building what's underneath the surfaces this whole time, and I never once looked beneath." "That's what design is, Mom," I said. "It's what's underneath. It's what holds everything together when the surface wears off." She hugged me in the middle of the studio. 340 employees pretended not to notice, which is the most generous thing coworkers can do. The Phase 2 expansion broke ground that spring. I stood at the ceremony beside Martin Ashworth, the club's board, and my mother, who had become the project's most enthusiastic supporter. Celeste was there too, not as a member performing belonging, as a sister watching her sibling work. The local paper covered the groundbreaking. The headline read, "Hayes Design Collective founder revealed as Briarcliff's anonymous benefactor." Below it, a photo of me in my linen dress, standing in the garden I'd designed, surrounded by the community I'd quietly rebuilt from the inside. My mother framed the article. She hung it in her living room, replacing the photo of Celeste's country club membership ceremony that had occupied the same wall for 4 years. Underneath, she added a small, handwritten note. "My daughter doesn't belong to the club. The club belongs to her." Sometimes the person they won't let through the door is the person who built the door. Sometimes the dress code is just a way of keeping out the people who make the room worth entering. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can wear to a country club isn't a designer dress or a membership card. It's a simple white linen dress and the quiet knowledge that every surface they're standing on exists because you put it there.